Being interested in natural scenery, whether it is painting a landscape or just incorporating natural elements into an artwork, requires one to understand how to represent various natural elements. And in order to have a rich and diverse setting, one needs to understand how to represent or draw various elements, which brings us to the genre of flowers. Now, there are so many different flowers to draw inspiration from. However, in today's tutorial, we will be breaking down the process of how to draw one of the most iconic flowers, and that is a rose. So with that being said, hey guys, my name is Matt. Welcome to another video by artincontext.org, where we explore various art related topics. And in today's video, we will be breaking down a very simple rose sketch. In this tutorial on how to draw a rose, we will be working with some simple materials. So we will be working with some pencil and pen, or you can just use whatever materials you have available to you. However, in this tutorial on how to draw a rose, we will start with a very simple rose sketch. When we work out the basic fundamental shapes, from here we will work on refining the shapes into a slightly more identifiable structure that resembles a drawing of a rose and kind of focuses on the various elements. So with that being said, the way in which we're going to start is by establishing the shape of the rose. So using our pencils, we want to start by demarcating a general area in which the rose will be drawn. Starting very simple, we want to start with a vague and basic shape, which we will refine into more realistic petal shapes. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start drawing the petals of the rose. Now, roses have petals that are stacked in layers, and we want to start working on the stacking of petals. Now, petals are quite compact in the center of the flower and start to become slightly more looser as they open up more as they move toward the outer layers. Rose petals are quite thin and have these uneven edges or bevels in their edges. These uneven petals also start to curl into one another, which is a very iconic feature of the petal shape for the rose. The petals also get slightly more narrow near the base of the flower's head. Now, take your time to work out the petals and how you stack them in this circular fashion. Try to think of it as almost a wrapping effect as it wraps around the center of the actual flower. The petals do unfold from the center point, therefore they wrap around a center point as they become slightly more compact and closer together. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to slowly start to refine the petals of the rose. So once we have worked out that wrapping quality, we can then start to refine the petals a little more with finer line work. We do want to make sure that we keep in mind that the petals are quite disheveled along their edges, so this is also a very subtle detail we want to maintain. This means we can add ridges along the edges by creating these bumps or bevels along the edges of the petals. Once the general shape of the petals has been established, you can then play around with how you refine their shape, adding in some smooth and disheveled petals as they wrap around the center point of the flower. So you can play around with that diversity in terms of more smoother textures and ruffled textures. But as we continue, once we start to have the general outline of the petals drawn, we can then work in some leaves along the bottom of the rose. Now, the leaves on a rose tend to be quite narrow and spearheaded, and you can decide how many you would like in your rose drawing. But as we continue, we can then start to add some shading to the rose drawing. Now that we have established a general rose drawing with some simple outlining and line work, we can now then start to add a little bit more dimension to the drawing with some shading. We do this by working on shading in each of the petals one at a time, and we want to consider how light would interact with a rose petal because roses are compact in the center. Naturally, more shadows will be present in the center of the flower as these areas tend to be slightly more compact, and this is because naturally the petals tend to become more denser near the base of the rose, naturally creating more shadow formations that are in close proximity to one another. So we want to consider how light would interact with the rose petal because roses are compact in their center, and more shadows would be present in the center of the flower. We also want to think about our shading style. Now, this is also a subjective thing. You can play around with different shading techniques, whether it be cross hatching, stippling, it's up to you. But we also want to think about our shading style. This could be smooth for shadowing, but more line style to provide more texture to the petal surfaces. But otherwise, take your time slowly working through the entire rose drawing, adding shading to each petal one at a time. Again, just think about how light would interact with this three-dimensional structure, and you want to think about the actual nature or structure of each petal, as they are these very thin type of fabric-like motions within the petal that will create these very subtle shadow formations along the surface area of each petal. But as you continue, we do want to make sure that we start to work towards the leaves or start integrating some shading into the leaves. Now, the leaves of a rose are generally darker compared to their petals. Now, the way in which we can obviously represent this in a sketch is to darken the shading within the leaves. So we want to have a variety of tonal ranges throughout the entire rose drawing. Now, when we do think about the leaves in relation to the petals of the rose, we can make them darker because this is just going to distinguish those various tonal values and create a little bit more variety within the color composition composition of our drawing. In this case, we are just doing a rose sketch and demonstrating the actual structure and the way to represent three-dimensionality in these various features. But when we do think about the actual leaves of a rose drawing, you want to think about the very rough texture, you want to think about the veins, and you want to think about how to represent those little spiky edges along the spear-headed shapes within each leaf. But once we have worked out the top section of our rose, making sure we have added some shading to the petals, we can now focus our attention onto drawing the stem and the leaves. Now the stem of a rose drawing is quite narrow with a very sturdy shape, allowing the rose to stand upright, and this can be drawn as a thin structure directly below the center of the rose head. We can also add texture to the stem with darkened vertical lines, and this is going to define the very fibrous quality of the rose or the stem of the rose. So drawing stems tend to be quite moist, specifically for the actual rose. So a rose tends to have a very fibrous, moist type of stem, so we can represent this quality by adding in these vertical lines that run down the stem. And then to further contextualize the rose drawing, we can also start to add in some thorns to represent the thorns that run through the stem of the rose. Now as we continue, we can proceed with drawing in the leaves of the rose. The leaves can be drawn as these circular spear-headed shapes. The leaves are generally in groups of 2 or 3 and are connected to thinner branches that connect to the larger stem. We can draw the pattern in each leaf as a series of lines that connect to the outer edges and the center partition of each leaf, representing those veins that divide the leaf up into 2 sections in each spearhead shape. We want to add line work to each leaf, making sure we have a center line that runs through each leaf with shading along each side. Again, thinking about the tonal variation is important to kind of create a distinction between the color of the petals and the color of the leaves within our rose sketch. And this is particularly for the case of drawing something in a monochromatic medium. In the case of adding color, that's completely up to you. You can obviously play around with how you color in this rose, but in this case we are just looking at the general features of a rose and how to represent them through a simple sketch. But otherwise you can add in as many leaves as you would like, giving the rose drawing a fuller look. And remember to take a break whenever you feel tired. Remember, drawing is a very laborious task sometimes, so we do want to make sure we're taking a break and coming back if we feel that we are getting slightly fatigued. But otherwise guys, continue with this process of shading. Make sure you go over all the various features one last time, and there you have it, how to draw a rose in a few simple steps. Guys, if you did like this video and are interested in us going into more detail into flora or anything related to plant life and representing them through simple sketches or more detailed sketches or colored artworks of various plant life, please do let us know in the comment section below. We love to hear back from you guys and what kind of content you are interested in, and you can also show your support by liking and subscribing, which helps to grow the channel and ultimately enabling us to make more art related content for you guys. But otherwise guys, thanks again for tuning in. That is it from us today. Until next time, see you in the next video. Cheers.